This is letter D in my A to Z series about words that I've chosen to help you expand your vocabulary in English. And if you're looking to expand your vocabulary in English, this could be the channel to subscribe to. You could do it right now if you liked. Now, if ever you read a novel in English, and I really recommend that you do because it's another excellent way to expand your vocabulary, on the inside front cover of the book, you will always find a paragraph that reads something like this. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Now, when I read this paragraph, I always think, well, surely they wouldn't have printed it unless the characters, places, and events in this book weren't based on real life. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, in English, there's a word that perfectly describes this kind of paragraph. D is for disclaimer. D is for disclaimer. Let's start with a definition. Disclaimer, noun, a formal declaration of non-responsibility. It's a clause that you'll often find in a contract or an advertisement saying that a company won't be responsible for what happens to you when you're using their product or service. Now, it wasn't really a word that existed in the English language before about 1750. Taking data from Google's Ngram viewer, which measures the frequency at which words are used within a language, we can see that the word disclaimer has become incredibly popular over the last 200 years or so. Back in the 18th century, nobody was using the word at all, but then during the Industrial Revolution, when companies started producing things that were both useful but which could also cause injury and loss of life, things like steam engines and motor cars, then the word disclaimer became increasingly popular. In fact, now you could say we live in the world of the disclaimer. Let's take a look at some synonyms. Truth is, though, with the word disclaimer, there aren't any truly close synonyms. We've got a word like disavowal, for example, which means to not take responsibility for something. And there's also the phrase terms and conditions, which I suppose is close to the meaning of disclaimer. But a disclaimer itself is part and parcel of the terms and conditions that you'd see in a contract or an advertisement. So it's not a particularly good synonym. So I reckon it's probably best that we look at the use of the word in a couple of example sentences. The disclaimer has no legal basis, but deters consumers from seeking compensation. Oftentimes, a firm will print a disclaimer saying that they're not responsible for something, when in the eyes of the law they actually are. It's simply a way of dissuading consumers from seeking legal redress. The disclaimer has no legal basis, but deters consumers from seeking compensation. Everybody had to sign the disclaimer before being allowed to begin the assault course. So an assault course is something that could be quite dangerous if you're going to be climbing trees and swinging off rope ladders. So often, before anyone's allowed to do such a thing, the organisers will force the participants to sign a disclaimer saying that the organisers are not responsible for any accidents that happen. Everybody had to sign the disclaimer before being allowed to begin the assault course. Someone once said to me that when you're looking at advertisements, the big print giveth and the small print taketh away. And so when you see a disclaimer in an advertisement, it's always going to be in a tiny, tiny font at the bottom of the advertisement. So let's take a look at my fictional advertisement for a miracle cure. Elixir by Global Health prevents all signs of aging. Global Health is not responsible for any side effects of Elixir, including skin irritation and premature death. So you're always going to see the disclaimer at the bottom of an advertisement in a very small font. Here's the real world disclaimer that comes from the Wikipedia website. It's quite interesting. Please be advised that nothing found here has necessarily been reviewed by people with the expertise required to provide you with complete, accurate or reliable information. Wikipedia cannot guarantee the validity of the information found here. I guess if you think about it, as disclaimers go, that's quite fundamental. Wikipedia are telling you that even though they've got this site full of information, you can't actually rely on any of it to be true. We can think of the word disclaimer as belonging to a group of words. We've got claim, a noun, to claim, a verb, to disclaim, the negative verb, claimant, another noun, and then disclaimer itself, obviously a noun. Let's put these in some example sentences. Henry had a strong claim to the throne. So there we're using claim as a noun. It was his right, or at least he thought it was his right. He had a right to the English throne. Now, in the verb form, he was determined to claim the throne ahead of his rivals. So to claim is to take something that's rightfully yours, be that the crown of a country or perhaps a lottery prize, something a little bit more day-to-day. Having always despised his father, Marcus disclaimed his inheritance. So despised means to hate. It's a very strong version of the verb to hate. Having always despised his father, Marcus disclaimed his inheritance. So he was rejecting his inheritance. Normally we'd probably use the word renounce rather than disclaim, and I'm not sure that I've ever used the word in my life before. However, to disclaim is certainly in the dictionary, and it does have this legal meaning of renouncing something like an inheritance. And here we've got another noun. Henry was far from being the only claimant to the throne. A claimant is someone who is claiming something. Could possibly be an insurance claimant, for example. If someone has hit your car and it wasn't your fault, you would be a claimant asking for money from the other driver's insurance company. And then that brings us back to the word disclaimer that we've been talking about. It's unlikely that anyone has ever read the disclaimer because it runs to several pages. When I wrote this line, I was particularly thinking about the terms and conditions you see when you have to install some new piece of software, and eventually you just end up ticking the I agree box without having read any of it. There may be a disclaimer in there, there may not. Most probably is, to be honest. Disclaimer isn't a particularly unusual noun in the sense that it's made from a verb with the addition of an er suffix. And there are literally hundreds of words in the English language that are constructed like this. So from the verb disclaim, we get disclaimer. From adapt, we get adapter. From borrow, we get borrower. From propel, we get propeller. From record, we get recorder. From transmit, we get transmitter. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. As I say, there are absolutely tons of words in the English language that are constructed like this. And if you're ever trying to guess what the noun form of a verb may be, the safest bet is always to add er to the verb. Adapt, adapter, disclaim, disclaimer, and so on. Unfortunately, however, we can't simply rely on adding an er suffix to a verb to create the noun. We've seen that on the one hand we have disclaimer, but on the other, even though it has the same verb at its heart, we have claimant, so we have an ant suffix instead. And claimant isn't alone in this regard. So in addition to claimant being built from the verb claim, we have apply, which gives us applicant, assist, which gives us assistant, consult, which gives us consultant, disinfect gives us disinfectant, and inhabit, which gives us inhabitant. So sometimes we have an ant suffix instead of an er suffix. One of the problems for learners of English is that although there are patterns in the way words are constructed, there are no fixed rules. Take these two verbs, for example. We've got claim and we've got infect. Then we've got negative forms of the verb by using the dis prefix. So we get disclaim and disinfect. But then any pattern that we thought we were following disappears when we get to the suffix to create the noun. So disclaim becomes disclaimer and disinfect becomes disinfectant. You might think they should both be the same, that we should have disclaimant and disinfectant, or disclaimer and disinfector, but it's simply not the case. So I think the word disclaimer has two lessons for us. One's linguistic, that even though you've seen obvious patterns in the English language, you can never 100% of the time predict how a word is going to be constructed. And the second is that if you haven't already chosen a career, becoming a lawyer and writing disclaimers for a living probably isn't a bad way to go. Until next time.